Welcome to the Stories in EDU podcast, the show where we talk with real educators and hear their powerful impact. Their stories will grab you, inspire you, and show you the reach of the work we do. And now, the Bretzman Group presents your hosts, Josh Gauthier and Mandy Taylor.
Welcome back to another episode of Stories in EDU, the podcast where you get to hear great stories from educators all over the country and the world about things happening or have happened to them in their classrooms. Mandy, it's getting to be that time of year.
Yes, it is.
Daylight saving time just ended or began. I'm really not sure about the start or end times of that. I just know in the spring I go forward and in the fall I go back. And I'm refusing to blame the hour lost on why this week has been a slog, but I don't know. What's your experience been?
Well, a couple of things. One, my kids are bigger, so I don't think I experience it in quite a dramatic way as I used to because they sleep better, like no matter what. The other thing is that we just, we're midway through our spring break. This is our spring break week. So we typically are having to go back to school the day after daylight savings, but this particular year it was this last weekend, and so then we've just kind of gotten to hang out and be home. So it hasn't really hit me in as dramatic of a way as it usually does. But so I feel like hopefully the kids will have gotten the kind of used to the week by the time we go back next week, and the teachers are trying to get their own families up and stuff like that. But it hasn't been as huge of a deal this year as it has in the past, for sure.
Interesting. I'm still refusing to blame it, but it might be fun to move to a place that doesn't have daylight saving time. I think it's saving. For whatever reason, I don't think you're supposed to say savings. I think that's just saving because you're saving daylight.
Okay.
So Ken,
well, you're just shifting it really. It doesn't get saved.
Yeah, no. You're not.
We don't move for another 3 weeks. So this is the weird time where when I schedule these things with my colleagues in the U.S., Canada, and other places, it's these 3 weeks where you switched and we haven't yet, and it's
Wait. So Mexico has different daylight saving time than the U.S.?
Well, we're the same as it used to be there, but then someone changed it up there, and we didn't. So yeah, that makes it fun. Yeah.
So Ken, welcome to the podcast. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and where you're at?
I'm Ken Bauer. I'm an associate professor of computer science here at the Tecnológico de Monterrey. National campuses. It's a private university, the largest private university in Latin America. About 100,000 students across 30-ish campuses. I'm at the Guadalajara campus, which is our second largest undergrad campus. I can't quote how many students we have on our campus. I can't remember. I don't work as an admin anymore, so I just pay attention to what's in my classroom and not the numbers outside. So I teach computer science, software engineering mostly. I like to work a lot with my first-year students, which tends to be just kind of a CS1 is what we call a Computer Science 1 course, Introductory to Programming. That's been the bulk of my teaching, but I also taught a lot of the upper level undergraduate computer science, software engineering type courses.
Wow.
And I've been here for, almost 23 years. A few breaks out of it, but I've been here since 1995.
So what's your trajectory been to get to that point? So 23 years in Guadalajara or... Yeah.
Yeah, I moved here just after I finished my master's degree. Met someone, we got married, and I moved down here in 1995.
Oh, love.
At the time, a year and a half or 2 years back working in industry in Canada, and I went back for 4 years to work on a PhD, which didn't finish in Canada, and I'm back again.
All right. So are you from Canada?
Yeah, I'm from Victoria, from the West Coast.
Excellent. So this is kind of unique in that you're really not connected to the United States at all.
Well, I studied my master's there. So I'm kind of like the NAFTA guy, but we won't talk about NAFTA because it's a touchy situation right now.
Yeah, isn't everything. All right. Well, it's really great to have you, and it's been awesome so far. We've had a really good variety of people, and like I was telling Mandy a little before the show, and you're you're the first primarily college professor, instructor that we've had. So it's a really cool perspective that we're going to get. And we often talk a lot about college in a couple of different ways. We talk about, at least in a school setting, like how they're preparing teachers to get into the field. But we also talk about what our students need to be ready to get to college, or what they need to be ready for in their college experience in terms of what the instruction is going to be like. But it sounds like you've been changing your instruction up quite a bit, that I think sort of models what's happening at the K-12 level, right?
I think in some ways, I love that point about learning from people with different perspectives and different programs. I do a lot of talks on flipped classroom and some other stuff. And I get invited to these elementary schools or secondary, or a lot of the ones in Mexico tend to be like from pre-elementary, pre-kindergarten, all the way to high school. There's these long trajectories in their schools. But I find it inspiring to me to go and talk to people that are working in a different program or a different area, because I don't know how a grade 3 teacher does their job. It's a totally different environment than I do, but I like to learn from them what their experiences are in that environment. So in terms of how things are shaking up here, I think at an institutional level, the Tec de Monterrey, where I work, we've been making a big push in kind of a change to our pedagogy. We call it Tech 21. We're already year 17, 18 of the 21st century, but we are making a lot more of a push for student-centered or learning-centered classrooms. We're making a push on competency-based learning. So there's a lot of things going on, but it's one thing to have an institutional push of where we're driving this boat, and especially it's a boat with 100,000 students and 10,000 faculty, and keeping that boat lined in one direction is difficult. But I think a lot of the innovation always comes from below. Innovation tends to come from below with support from above, so I'm really happy to have support from above and doing new things in our pedagogy. But just like almost any teacher who's doing innovation, and I think you've probably heard these stories so often, we tend to be lone wolves. We're doing it ourselves. We're the weird ones. We need to jump online and talk to people like us, or with Jason, who I met online, I think, before we met in person, because we are doing it alone. And one interesting fact, that I'm a foreigner. You're kind of like a foreigner for you guys because I'm coming from Mexico, but I'm also a foreigner in my institution because I'm a Canadian, and I can play that I'm the crazy Canadian foreigner guy, and I do stuff different than other faculty can, and kind of get away with it with my students. Because my students know that I'm this weirder, different culture kind of guy. So it's allowed me to do a lot more different classroom and experiment with my students.
You know, one of the things you said when you were introducing yourself is that now that you're not in an admin role, you can pay attention to just what's going on in your classroom. And I feel like in a way I'm kind of the flip side of that, because I was in the classroom for 17 years, actually taught first and then third grade that you mentioned earlier. And then now in my role as an instructional coach, it's so fascinating because my perspective has shifted. Mm-hmm. And I still love to be connected to kids and in classrooms with teachers, but my view and my vision has changed. Mm-hmm. And that's what my particular role calls for. But it's definitely given me a perspective that I never had when I was in the classroom. I don't think one's better or one's worse. It's just such a different way of approaching an issue or a situation or just a topic, really, because I need to look at things from systems perspectives, from, vertical alignment, from community outreach, different things like that. Whereas when I was in the classroom, my focus got to be just that was my world, was those 22 kids, their families, and just that perspective. So I think it's fascinating how no matter who we talk to on the podcast, the perspective they bring has taught me so much about where everybody kind of fits and how interdependent we all are, on each other.
Mhm.
And then two, I think how you were talking as a professor, I work with the Central Texas Writing Project, and the writing project idea is that we all learn from teachers, like that teachers are the best teachers of other teachers. So we have pre-K teachers through college level teachers, and the things that we get to learn from each other are large. You would think they're so different, but they really, really come back to ultimately the same theories and ideas and the way people learn. So I'm just fascinated to learn more about what you've done with grading, because I'm coming from an elementary perspective, but I have kids that are in the middle school headed into high school. And so the way that I see them interacting with content and with their teachers and with grading and the whole game is really fascinating to me when you're talking about the way that you've decided to move to more of a learner-centered classroom. So tell me more.
And it's really interesting what you say there. Having that perspective of all the different stakeholders is key. And I was in the classroom first, and admin are just those people. They're those ogres up there that do the stuff and whatever. We don't want to talk to them. Just leave us alone. But then when you've got that different perspective and you come back into the classroom, you can appreciate their roles and you can get their help better because you know what they're able to do as that stakeholder within this life we call educating.
Mm-hmm.
And we all have a different role to play. But I think if you've never seen that other side, just like we complain about administrators who don't know what it's like to teach,
Right.
I think teachers should also know what it's like to be an administrator.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So on some of the stuff you sent us before you jumped on, you talk about this 5-year journey you've been on, going from you referred to as a mostly traditional classroom. Now you threw out such terms as abolishing grades. You mentioned flip mastery. So I want to dive into that a little bit. So is it with your freshmen undergrads that you do this with? Is it all your kids, or what type of classes you do it?
It's with all, and they're all different too. The interactions with the first years is much different to ones that are at the end of their program, definitely. But yeah, I do. I pretty well jumped in feet first into each of the major changes I did in my classroom. Some people like to kind of dip their toes and go, I'm just going to do it with this one group, and then the other group's going to be standard the way I've always been teaching. But I tended to jump in wholly, completely on all of my groups.
Excellent. So you've got to have some stories about freshmen that are coming into your program, into your classroom, and they've probably come from a very traditional schooling environment, ABCD grades, all that good stuff. And they jump in and you're like, hey guys, we don't have grades in here. You got to have something from that, right?
Yeah. So the story that's always there is that we all have reputations. So the students know about you before they show up in your classroom because they've been talking to all the other students that have been through. And well, I've got students that their parents were my students. So there's also that. But I think that's true in some ways, in some ways not. I've had these stories like there was this one group, and this is before the abolished grading, more kind of flip mastery level work where I was sitting in a classroom and moving away. There's no lectures. We're just working on what they need to do. They have their list of things they're working on, different ways of complying and showing their mastery of computer science concepts, mainly through programming, but also creating videos, instructing other students about their work. And I'm in the corner working with some students, and we've got these cool chairs that we can move around, roll around, and we rearrange the furniture really easily. And we're working on some code with a group of students, 2 of them. And then some more start to come closer because, I'm working on that same thing, so they're paying attention. And then out of the corner of my eye, I see across the classroom, Pepe grabs some markers, and they're my markers. And he grabs my markers. And he starts writing on my whiteboard and explaining to Zaira something about, I can't remember what he was explaining, but there was that instant kind of automatic mode of, that's my stuff. I mean, that's not your role. You're not the teacher. but that's what I want, right? But I'm just not used to that over years of this, probably in year 2 of my switch. And it was an interaction of, oh yeah, actually that's okay. And I'll just leave them alone and let them go at it. And I was talking with him later. And he came through a very non-traditional education mode. So he was used to this, and he was a first-year student. And he's saying, are they going to do this in all my classes? And this is great. I didn't know it was going to be like this when I came to this school. And I'm like, just slow down. It's okay.
It's not.
It's not going to be. Almost all the other classes are going to be very traditional, which are going to be hard for him because he came from a non-traditional environment.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I just saw Pepe the day before yesterday for lunch. He's just about to graduate. But it's this mixture of students, of the ones that aren't used to these different ways of learning. Mostly about when I talk about flip, the biggest challenge in flip is flipping the responsibility role. That the student has to be much more responsible for their own learning and drive that learning and be able to go, I have a question, and not wait for me to come to them with a question to them. And what makes it more complicated is this mix of students that have different backgrounds, because almost all of my students come from private schools, a few from public. But that dynamic mix of students that are different is the really hard thing. And I would say the students that are kind of the keeners, that are used to getting A's or 10s or 100s or whatever the scale is that they're marking on, they're the ones that usually have the biggest resistance because they're really good at playing school. And they don't like it that we've changed the rules. This student was a really, really good student. Actually, I've got a good video of him talking about the classroom. That difference for him was a big shock coming to a traditional classroom. And I think that gets to what you were talking about, Mandy, is when you got these students and you're preparing them, and then they, you send them off on their way. And you've given them a rich, learner-focused environment, and then they get thrown into one that's not. And they got to deal with, okay, now I'm in traditional mode, but that's not traditional for me.
Right.
And are we doing them a disservice? People will say that sometimes, that we're not preparing them for the real way of learning in school, when we should just do it the traditional way, because that'll prepare them better for what they're going to land in when they get to university or when they get to secondary school or high school. So I think there's a link there to what you were speaking about.
Yeah. Well, and I think ultimately too, I think one of the hardest things, I mean, I've been out of the classroom for 3 years, but it really comes down to control, like who is in control. And when even when I went, my college prep classes were 94 to 98. So right there at the very end of, and when I'm looking at just the way that I was taught, the way my professors structured class and things like that, it's so different now in classrooms than the way that I was taught then. And so all of that new kind of learning of handing the reins over to the kids and not scaffolding every single thing for them. I know Joy Kerr in her book, in her Shift This, talks about how the kids are asking questions about the pencils and the pencil sharpeners, and she's like, I don't know, what do you think? And they can't handle it because they're like, I want you to tell me. I want you to boss it, and I've seen that a lot of times with teachers and with kids. Are like, just tell me what you want. And when we're, leaving it up to them a little bit more, it's very uncomfortable if you've not ever been asked to do those things before, or to be in charge of it yourself, or to hold yourself accountable, because you don't know how to do it if you've never had to do it. So it's just a complete shift in who's, like you said, he could do just as good of a job as you could on that, whatever. And you had to kind of decide, am I comfortable with letting him do this? Because you didn't have, you didn't have to. Right.
Okay, so back to control, about students taking control, students being more autonomous, as well as peer learning is what was happening in the classroom at that moment with the story with Pepe.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's still, because it really, I think what it is almost a redefinition of the role of the teacher, because I think a lot of teachers teach. I know, like, when I think of when I wanted to be a teacher when I was young, I wanted to write on the board. I wanted to use the overhead. I wanted to have a vis-a-vis marker. I wanted to have chalk,
And be on stage.
Right. I mean, and so I really do think that it's this art to know how to effectively facilitate and how to establish, because you still are establishing boundaries and expectations and procedures, that is still the work of the teacher, and that is an art kind of knowing when to lead and when to pull back and when to push and prod and when to ask more questions instead of just giving an answer. Because our kids are used to finding things out on their own. They can just Google stuff and look it up and watch videos and ask their friends. And, my kids all the time, I'm asking them things about my phone or social media or whatever. And my son's always just like, let me just have it. Let me play with it. And then he does it and he figures it out and he teaches me how to do it. And I'm far less comfortable with that. They just kind of will click and push and bump and see what works and see what doesn't. And so it's so much less formulaic than I'm used to.
Well, it's also because if we're just doing direct instruction and standing in front of the classroom and killing them with PowerPoint or whatever we're doing, you're telling one story. And that's really easy. And you're telling one story where you're the protagonist and everyone's just the audience. And I think what's fun about more learner-focused classroom is that there's 30 stories going on in my classroom and I'm not controlling them. I'm like the dungeon master, but they're all just running around doing their own thing. And it's really hard because every one of my students has a different need. And they have a different need at different times. And it's really emotionally and physically draining to run around my classroom and attend to each one of them. I think one thing that you said that was really important is, I think you used the word scaffolding, which is something that's really important there, is that when I move it to them being in control, which is really hard for them to get used to, but eventually they're starting to get used to it. It also means that I need to know which one of them are used to it. And I can leave Pepe's fine. I don't have to worry about him. He's just doing his thing and he's helping other people and he'll tell me when he needs me. But there's other ones that don't. And they're not used to asking. They're hiding in the corner. They got their hoodie pulled down like that. and they're just hiding from you. And you got to find the way to break through that shell, because it's not because they're lazy. It's not because they're, lazy is usually the word we use it as students, that they're not.
Or incapable. Right.
Or definitely not incapable. It's something's happened, or you got to break them out of their shell. And it's going to take a while, and you need to build that confidence. And I think the way we're teaching, where we're working directly with students one-on-one or in small groups, is one of the stories I've had from students is that because I spend time with them in the classroom, unlike a lot of their other teachers at the front, they trust me more. And I've broken that barrier where they can trust me. And especially when I'm some 40-something old professor, male, and it's a 17 or 18-year-old girl, they're not comfortable going to my office to ask for help. They're definitely not. And one of my students, Frida, who I have a video of, she said she really loved this "you can book me" system where I don't have set office hours. They can schedule whenever. It's really cool, I think. And she said she liked it because she could make appointment to see me anytime that fit her schedule and mine. And she felt really much more comfortable coming to see me because I had spent time with her in the classroom beside her, talking about whatever activity she's doing and just working with her. And I broke past that trust barrier. And I think that's really important to me as a teacher inside the classroom, but also out. I get students who will show up and just release all of their stress and problems about family, or did I choose the right degree program, or my boyfriend or girlfriend or mom or dad, and those things come out in my office. And I'm not a school psychologist. I can't, all I can do is listen,
right,
give them someone to listen to them, and then try to give them advice to go talk to the support systems we have on campus. But the fact that they trust me is so important to me. And this happens a lot more now. Now that, again, going back to the point that I have a reputation, my students know who I am. They're, oh, it's that Canadian Ken Bauer guy. And probably someone's told them, yeah, if you got a problem, you can go talk to him. He won't break confidence. He won't tell your mom. He won't let things out. And I think that's really important in my classroom as well, as those stories of students coming and telling their stories to me in my office. And it's got to the point as undergraduate, I have this kind of rule where they all have to come and speak with me at least 3 times during the semester, the 2 grading periods and then the final grading period. One is to interview them, to ask them, well, what's your grade? Because I don't have a grading system. Besides a really loose set of rubrics, which are really loosey-goosey, and they can break them if they want. And they just tell me what they think their grade is, and we discuss it, and we discuss what they can do better. But the tangential benefit is I get to know my students more.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean, ultimately, that relationship, I feel like people buy into you as a person before they buy into what you're selling, and kids very quickly. I did a blog post the other day and I said something about my son has such a good BS radar, as far as his teachers and the ones that have impacted him in really great ways, and he always ties his love of the content to his love for the teacher. I always know, like, if he's like, oh, I love, whatever, history, I love science, I love math, whatever. And then the next year, I hate math. And I'm like, you don't hate math. You don't like your math class. That's different, But we've really had to kind of talk about, it's so fascinating to me in the course of a 7-period day, how his day goes up and down, but it's all based on that relationship with the teacher. He tells me about kids. He tells me about, the things that they do, things that they wore, jokes they told. I mean, it's just so very clear, the teacher, the impact that those relationships have on him.
Empathy is key. I mean, the students learning that I'm a person, I'm a human, and I like to have random conversations. And then also us not just putting our students into these kind of groups of, the keeners and the real hard workers and the lazy guys. That we have a relationship. I told my boys today to talk to their classmates and teacher about Stephen Hawking dying, and so it was on the news in the car. And said, well, who's that? And well, we can talk about it, and you should bring it up in class. And your teacher will probably be blown away that you're bringing this up in class. Yeah, and it's a thing to have these relationships. And I love your point about BS detector. Howard Rheingold, who's one of the pioneers of the early web, said this: one of the most important things we need to teach our students is to have a good BS detector.
It's amazing that every episode, I think, no matter what we've talked about, that relationship piece always comes up. And I think that's the tone we set from our very first episode, was how important the teacher relationship with the students is to everything. It's paramount. And whether you're doing, a gradeless classroom that's flipped and mastery based, or whether you're, teaching in high poverty district, all these things, it's those relationships between the teachers and the relationships between the teachers and the students that really seem to make the difference. And it's echoing over and over again. And, what I've gathered from you is that that is like your heart, like you understand that all of these students have these stories, and you're structuring your class to allow them to tell them. And that's,
right.
that's powerful.
And I'd emphasize, Josh, that this is someone who's been in the classroom for 20 plus years. And I wasn't that teacher in 1995. I think I was authentic, and I like to identify with my students, but I was definitely much more of I'm in here to control the classroom and make my students learn this material and give them quizzes and exams and all the classic stuff we think of when we first show up in the classroom. But I think it's important to tell people that the perspective we have 20-something years later is very different than what we had when we first got into the classroom. And like we discussed, of being in the classroom and then going into admin and maybe coming back to the classroom, all of these experiences build our ability to connect with our students. I think that's really important why those of us with lots of experience should be mentoring new teachers. There should be much more. I don't know why we don't have that in our system. We don't hook up some old guy like me with the new teachers that show up and take us out for coffee. I'll accept a coffee and I'll talk about my old stories, or they can just listen to podcasts and hear the story all the time.
Exactly.
That they could do. All right. Well, Ken, it has been a lot of fun listening to you and hearing a little bit about your experience, and being that it's so different from everything we've heard so far, it's been very refreshing for sure.
I hope it's useful.
Oh, it definitely is. And as with all of these, I've got tons of great things that I picked up from you and learned about, and look forward to checking out. So we have one more thing before you run away.
With my notes.
They're so pretty. You know, mine just aren't the same. They're
Sorry that you've got gross notes.
mine are just very straight-laced. So we are going to do our lightning round with the Bretzman Group personalized PD game of stories, as we do every episode. If you don't have one of these, you really need to get a pack. They're great discussion points amongst staff and teaching people about experiences in the classroom, and just gets us telling stories, which might be easier in some circles than others, but I find these really help facilitate. So even though we probably didn't need much help tonight, we're gonna have a little prompt here. So here's the card I picked for us, and we're each gonna have a minute to answer. We're gonna start with you, Ken, because you're our esteemed guest, so you get to go first.
Cool.
And I am going to get the timer on the screen. Yeah, we're for real. We have a timer and everything.
Oh my.
That's because I talk too much.
Yeah. So our prompt tonight is create student videos. So tell a story about how students created videos for your class. Did they act out a scene from your content, use an avatar, or edit it like a Hollywood producer? What tools did students use to make it awesome? Go ahead.
Go ahead. I get a minute. Hit that start button. All right. So I don't think my students do that creative videos. They're not like acting out Shakespeare. What my students were using videos a lot for is mastery-based learning. So they would get 1 point for showing they understood a topic, but they get 2 points to show that they could really explain it. And so they really loved making YouTube videos. I'd get students making like 25-minute videos that could have been 2 minutes. But they just loved being on video, and I wasn't going to stop them. So they really did a good job on that. The best story I had was this Swedish student, and she made her video. And the fun part is that they were always upside down because she couldn't figure out how to make them right side up. But she said, Ken, the funny thing is I have to understand the material before I speak about it on my video. And I'm like, bingo, that's exactly what I wanted. Awesome. I love your upside down videos. They're the best I've ever had.
That's awesome.
That is hilarious. All
I
right,
just remembered the part about the upside down, but that's true.
Awesome.
Mandy, you have to follow that up.
Okay. So this year, I office with our counselor, and her and I are the student council sponsors for our kids, and we've never done it before. We had 2 teachers before, and they both are taking a break, a well-deserved break. They've done it for 7 years, I guess. And so Danae and I are doing this, and we're like, okay, when we worked with a Boy Scout that was doing his Eagle Scout project, and the kids wanted a buddy bench. This thing, if you've seen it, where basically it's a bench, and then at recess, if you're feeling lonely or like you don't have anyone to play with, you sit on the bench, and then people look at the bench, and then if somebody's sitting there, they go approach them, and everybody goes on. So anyway, we got the bench, and then we were like, how are we going to tell people? And we had the kids make videos to explain the buddy bench process. So all we did was say, explain it. And they came back with the coolest videos because we didn't tell them how to do it.
Wonderful.
All right. I don't know if I used this one before. I feel like we talked about videos in a lightning round, but I don't care because I love this story anyways. All right. So I had the opportunity and the privilege a few years back when I was in the classroom that I got to teach in an elementary school, which was super cool. And I wouldn't trade that experience for anything in the world, even though middle school is like my place. Elementary school was really fun. And I had this 4th grade class that was this it was part of this win period. So they came to me as almost like an enrichment opportunity, and I saw them a half an hour a day every day. So they were the only class that I've ever had an entire year for, because I taught business ed. I was a specialist. I got kids for a quarter or a semester. So we read through the book Drizzle, and then these fourth graders, we brought in props and things, and they actually all made book trailers for Drizzle, and we used WeVideo to edit them. The fourth graders did this, and I think that that's so awesome that they filmed and they went through this whole process in little tiny chunks and edited it themselves, and they turned out pretty cool and are still on YouTube.
Super.
Because these kids' whole lives are making videos of themselves. So the making the video part isn't hard. We don't even have to teach them how to do it. They just do it.
So we had to get permission for that. I asked the principal, and then I had to send stuff home because they were elementary kids to see if it was okay to put them on YouTube. And the kids in the groups that did not get everybody's signatures were crushed because they didn't get to go on YouTube, which I get, but it was still fun. And I was just reminded of this. I was setting up for our tech challenge, and one of the things I had in there was making videos or something like that. And I just was, oh yeah, these book trailers, and so I put one in there as like an example of a project. So it's a good time. Anyways, Ken, thank you once again for joining us on Stories in EDU.
Oh, thank you both. This has been awesome. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Mandy, and Jason as well. I'll make a plug as well. I just saw a friend of mine, Alan Levine, who was here in Guadalajara visiting, and he had a call out. It's for educators in general. It was he has a site. It's called stories.cogdogblog.com. I'll send you the link later. But he requested people to make video stories of connectedness, how it's really important to connect online. So I gave him one of these stories, and he used it in his keynote speech for K-12 group, trying to convince them how to use Twitter and social media to connect to other educators. So I'll give you a link to that. There's some really good stories about how to use the internet to connect to other educators. It goes along with the story team.
That's awesome.
Any plugs you want to make for yourself, where people might find out more about your great stuff?
Well, I ostensibly blog at kenbauer.me, although I need to blog more, but we always say that. You can follow me on Twitter, Ken_Bauer. If you do the Ken without the underscore, you're going to get a different Ken Bauer, who got so tired of getting random requests to me. His blog, or his Twitter handle actually says the other Ken Bauer. Just kind of fun.
Oops.
It's great.
Awesome.
We got a meme, so when we confuse each other, people get us confused. We pull out the this is not the Ken Bauer you're looking for. Contact me on Twitter. I really love interacting with teachers. You can follow my stuff on the blog. I'm the chair of the board of the Flip Learning Network, so you can see what we're doing over there as well.
Super awesome. Well, on behalf of Mandy and myself, we'd like to thank you once again for tuning in to Stories in EDU. We hope that you've been inspired or learned something new through the podcast today, and make sure you subscribe on whatever platform you're using to take part and
hit that subscribe button down there.
Yeah, it's somewhere. I don't know where it is. It kind of depends on where you're listening to this. It's to the below or to the left or to the right. You might have to hit back. I'm not sure. But we're everywhere. We're Google Play, YouTube, iTunes. So wherever you're listening to us, thank you for doing so, and we hope you'll catch us on the next episode of Stories in EDU.
Thank you for tuning in to the Stories in EDU podcast. Please be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Until next time, thanks again.